Well, continuing in the Word and the book of Revelation, what a great study this is. You know, it's a blessing associated with reading it and hearing it and doing it to respond to this. So, what a great study. What a great word the Lord has left for us to peer into and understand. Before I get into chapter 6, just want to say that there's a progression in God's revelation. You know, He doesn't tell us everything right at the beginning of the Bible, but over time, through the prophets, through the historical books, through the wisdom literature, He unveils His plan for humanity over time. We see that really clearly when we get to the end of the Bible. Matthew or in Daniel chapter 20, Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. We have just a few verses there where Daniel gives us a kind of a broad framework of what the future holds for the earth and for Israel. And that framework then is filled out later by Jesus himself. Jesus, in a prophetic role in Matthew 24 and 25, expands on what Daniel says in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, and describes the future and what's going to happen to Israel in the future. And then when we come to these chapters in the book of Revelation, chapters 6 through 19, we have even more information about what's going to be happening during this period of tribulation on the earth. So this is really the culmination of the revelation that God has given us. And as I said earlier, I think maybe in chapter 1, that the book of Revelation doesn't give us a lot of new information, but it organizes the information that the Lord has given us in prior revelation. So we see that here as the seal is opened and these judgments begin to pour out. Let me say that some would look at these judgments and say they recapitulate each other. So we have these seal judgments, and then we have trumpet judgments, and we have bowl judgments at the end. And some look at these and say, well, there's similarities between the judgments, so similarity must be the same, must mean they're same. So these three rounds of judgment are all actually just repeating themselves. They're concurrent, that the judgment of the seals and the trumpets and the bowls are really one set of judgments that are opened. I take a different view. I think most dispensationalists do, that these are chronological, that there's a period of time over which the first six seals are opened and the judgments are let loose. And then the last seal, the seventh, opens up to the next set of judgments, the seven trumpet judgments. And then the seventh trumpet judgment opens to the final judgments, the bowl judgments. So that's how I see it. I see a chronological progression over a period of 7 years, a time of Jacob's trouble, time of tribulation that Jesus spoke of. So with that background, let's jump into chapter 6 here, the beginning of the tribulation. In my view, the rapture of the church has happened. It's could be as late as the end of chapter 5. It could be as early as the beginning of chapter 4, but the rapture has occurred. The church is no longer on the earth at this point, and God's wrath is being poured out. It's another view. I'll talk about that at the end. But just to divide this up into pieces that we can understand is verses 1 and 2. I've labeled those as the white horse judgment. This corresponds to what Jesus said in his Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24, verses 4 and 5, about false Christs being let loose on the earth. That's what I think this rider on the white horse is. He has a crown. He's given it for conquering and conquering. He has a bow, but apparently no arrows here. So he doesn't seem to have the power to wage war. This is a false Messiah that is going out, and Jesus warned us of false Christs. The next horse there is the red horse, verses 3 and 4. This is a horse bringing war to the earth. Again, parallel to what Jesus talked about in Matthew 24, verses 6 and 7. So what Jesus talked about in those two chapters is being described in more detail here. A black horse is let loose in verses 5 and 6. This is a horse bringing famine to the earth. Matthew 24, 7, Jesus talks about this. And a pale horse bringing death in verses 7 to 8. And Jesus talked about this in Matthew 24, 9. So at this point, verses 1 through 7, Jesus refers to these as birth pangs. So this is just the beginning. You know, if your wife has given birth to children, you know those contractions start coming on, and they start out relatively mild, and they get more severe and more severe and more frequent. These are the birth pangs that Jesus is talking about. Starts out relatively mild. They get more intense as time goes on. From here down is Jesus refers to, I think, is the Great Tribulation, beginning in verse 9, where we see many are slain, the fifth seal is opened, and the souls of those slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne is visible to John at this point. He sees them, he hears them. These are people who are dying in faith during the tribulation. So one of the questions that often comes up is, will people be saved during the tribulation? And yes, they will. And we see that here. Jesus talked about the martyrdom that's going to happen in Matthew 24, 9 to 13. So again, there's a correlation here in that progression of revelation that God has left us in his word. Then the sixth seal is opened, and he sees these signs on earth and these signs in the skies as well. These are great signs that Jesus talked about in Matthew 24, again, verse 7. Cataclysmic signs that we see here that are described from verses 12 through 17. Call your attention to verse 16. It says the people on the earth hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks and of the mountains, calling on the mountains and rocks to fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. So the people on earth know where these judgments are coming from at this point. Incredible as it is, they think they're going to be able to hide from God and the Lamb, from God the Father and God the Son, as they bring judgment on the earth. And they're not going to be able to do that. It's incredible to think that they imagine they could be protecting themselves, but this is more evidence that sin makes you stupid, in my opinion. Notice at the end of verse 16, he says, protect them from the wrath of the Lamb. So some views of the book of Revelation, and specifically with regard to the timing of the rapture, would say that this is the first mention of wrath on the earth, that there's going to be, at this point, a pre-wrath rapture of the church. So not before the tribulation. The church will experience some of the tribulation, but at this point it's the wrath of God being poured out, and they'd say that the tribulation occurs about here. I think that's wrong for a couple of reasons. Just let me summarize them here. Is that they are being saved from the wrath of the Lamb. This is something that's already occurred, that they're experiencing the wrath of the Lamb. The tense of the Greek verb indicates that this is something that has occurred, that wrath has started. And I think if you look in verses 1, 3, 5, and 7 through this chapter, you'll see that wrath has come. It's repeated several times that the wrath of the Lamb has come. And this is just summarizing it in verse 16. So for my pre-wrath brothers, I disagree with you there. If you want to know some more information about the tribulation, how it fits into the chronology of end-time events, I have a playlist that looks at the end-time events in order. And there's a video there about the tribulation and what's it involved and when does it happen. And you can go and look at that playlist or look at that specific video on the playlist. So that's chapter 6, brothers and sisters. God bless you for gathering the blessings of reading and hearing and doing, heeding the book of Revelation. May God richly bless your study. May you come away from this with a renewed understanding of this important book of the Bible. God bless you.